All right. Well, hey, we're live now here on Twitch. Well, it should be live in a second if you're tuning in. But if you're tuning in, you're probably seeing this now. So hey, here we are.
We've made it. We're here.
Yeah,
we're live. No dead air, man.
that's true.
Come on.
Cool. Well, welcome everybody who's tuned into the stream, or if you're watching this in the future, welcome to the past. Here we are. I'm Joshua Timberman. I'm with Allma. I'm joined by Pete.
I'm Pete.
Hi, Pete.
Hi, Joshua.
Hi, Pete. It's good to see you again.
With Allma. Good to see you again.
And we have a special guest with us today. We have Ben Rockwood from Mondoo. Ben, why don't you give us an introduction? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
I'm Ben Rockwood. I'm at Mondoo. I've been there for almost 5 weeks. So
old timer. All right.
I know, right? Got there just in time for them to come out of stealth and make some announcements.
Well, I was gonna say there was just a big announcement. What was the big announcement?
Announcement was we announced our first round of funding. It was a nice round. 15 mil. Lead investor was Atomico, which is super awesome company. It was a VC firm started by the fellow who invented Skype and made a whole bunch of money, and then decided that he really struggled when he started Skype, getting help and getting connected, and he wanted to build something that allowed new entrepreneurs to have an easier path. So Atomico is a really, really cool VC. They don't just sort of give you the money, then want to see the return. They actually are invested in their companies, both monetarily and in terms of thought. So great partner for us to have. Really excited about that. So I guess prior to that, I was on sabbatical for a while. If you've never done that, it's an awesome thing to do. It was fun. It flew by though. It just felt like a really long weekend.
So now I did some time off, and I feel like I was a bad sabbatical where I spent all my time just like trying to meet with people and figure out what was next and not feel super lazy. How did you structure your time when you took time off during that? I feel like that's always the hard part.
Yeah, the first thing is that I actually did intend to take like actual time off and actually like clear my head, right? Like I started working when I was like 15, 16. And had never really taken more than I think 2 weeks off until I got to this point somewhere in my 40s that I shall not disclose. So I didn't know how to take any real time off.
I knew
that, like you hit this sort of point, like I guess midway through your career, I guess is what they call the midlife crisis, right? Where you suddenly kind of look down the road at what's next, and you're like, at some point I hit 65 and I have to make some decisions, and like, what am I really doing between here and there, right? Like I gotta decide if I'm going to stay on the path that I'm on, or do I need to change trajectories or whatnot. So I took like real concerted time off, and most of that time was honestly like soul searching. Read a lot of books on psychology. Like I'd always read self-help books, and whatever business book of the month was about better work-life balance and stuff. But like I went and read like Carl Jung. Like I was like, I have like things in my head that I need to like sort out and I don't understand, and I need to go like figure out. So I went and like honestly like worked on myself for quite a while. I spent a lot of time with my kids, all that stuff I wanted to do with my family that I just never had time for. So I threw my wife out of a plane. That was cool.
I heard about that on the internet.
Yeah. I got my wife to go skydiving. She was working on a project about Howard Hughes that I can't talk about, but she was really super getting into aviation. So I found a local company that has biplanes, like open cockpit biplanes that will take you on like tours around. I was like, you've never really been in a plane other than a passenger plane. Like,
yeah.
And you're spending all this time thinking about Howard Hughes and all these, early aircraft and stuff. I'm like, let's put you in one and get you to fly around,
My goodness, that's amazing. I didn't know it was a biplane.
Yeah. And we learned how to play golf. That was weird.
Yeah.
Wait, you've never like never played golf before, but started during this time, huh?
Yeah. So, my wife and I used to like go to like the driving range, right? And I kind of liked it. It was like really good for like rage, right? You go out there and just hit the ball as far as you
just
can.
Hit that ball as hard as you can. Yep.
Yeah. And you'd be the jerk who was just like, I hit it over the fence. Woohoo! Home run. Other people look like that's not how you do that. But
right. Yeah. I actually I actually played golf as a kid. My parents were both super into it, so I had a bit of that, and then got back into it a few years ago. But I haven't played in a while. But yeah, it can be a lot of fun.
If you've never done it though, there's this whole like it's another world. Like I didn't think I was actually allowed to go and play golf. Like I honestly didn't think that I could just walk up to a public golf course. I mean, I know they're public, right? But I know you could just like walk in, never having played golf before, pay them the money, they like give you some clubs and just let you go out there and do whatever you want. I just didn't know, right? I thought that you'd have to take a test or like, have you ever done this ever?
Yeah, you have to wear like the proper attire and you have to have a little hat and yeah,
they just let us loose. And then we found out that like after a couple of holes, there's this cart that goes around that has alcohol.
Yes.
Gotta have a beer cart.
Yes, there is one of those. there might be two of those. It depends on the course.
They did tequila and Jameson shots.
Oh my God.
Like, the lemon wedge and the salt and the whole thing. And my wife and I, we never did like the college drinking thing, right? So all of a sudden we're like, it's time to make up for lost time. So we're like, trying to remember, like, okay, you do like you lick the salt first, and then you say, or wait, which the order, and we're like, this is way more fun than we ever imagined.
Yeah, you throw a ping pong ball at something, except you're on a golf course, so maybe you throw a golf ball somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, well, man, we went through a lot of golf balls because like we kept losing our balls, or like you'd hit it into somebody's yard and you'd just be like, whatever,
Sorry.
So I guess that's their ball now.
We're playing our rules, just like Chuck. Oh, there you go. I think we went through like 10 balls or something, like our first round. Perfect. It was super fun. So anyway, sabbaticals are awesome, and I've talked to a lot of people who've done them, and a lot of times, it's like thinking about what's next in terms of their career. So they spend the whole time interviewing or talking to other people. And it just goes by really quick. Or other people just have personal things they want to do, right? They want to go on a trip to this country or whatever. They go do that trip, and then they come back and they get back into work. And little bit different than this sort of like go climb the mountain and think big thoughts and try and readjust your life and all that. But it went by ridiculously quick.
Yeah, well, and so I've come to this idea around. We don't need work-life balance because work is part of your life. Like for most people, you have to work, you have to make an income to be able to support yourself and your family. And I like the idea of work-play balance. And it sounds like you had a really good play balance in the sabbatical. So I'm super thrilled for that, for you to be rejuvenated and ready to come back to technology. So speaking of technology, I'd like to ask you a question. This is the week of KubeCon. Is it KubeCon or is it CubeCon?
I've been saying CubeCon, like Cubert, the video game.
Or like it's
pretty
a
sure
cube.
I'm wrong.
Yeah. What is it, Ben? Is it KubeCon or KubeCon?
KubeCon. I say KubeCon. Other people say it. Honestly, it reminds me of the early days of Linux, right? Is it Linux or Linux, right? Like It's like now, like we've got it all so down. It's actually hard to like say
it's Ubuntu, really, or it's Red Hat.
Yeah.
So speaking of KubeCon and Kubernetes, so let's just start off right up with the question: what is the business case for Kubernetes? Like, why would I run Kubernetes instead of just putting my app on an EC2 instance? You can give a hot take too. That's cool.
I know it's so well, I mean, the number one reason right now is going to be that if you have any modern developer, they're just not going to deploy it right on an EC2 instance. If you just say there's an EC2 instance, go deploy it, they're just going to be like, why did I choose this company? So, I mean, it's just become, containerization has become the de facto way of developing, right? It's not something that we have to debate anymore. It's not something we have to convince each other to do anymore. And I mean, hey, we were all involved in Chef, right? Config management was a thing and was a big thing. It was in the early days of DevOps, it was actually hard to separate config management from DevOps. The two were essentially synonymous because that was the big problem that had to be solved. Containers made a lot of those problems just go away, which was the right solution, right? And config management is still there at a layer, but it's a lower layer. It's much more defined. It's much less complex. So, being that containers are the one true way, and all of us have sort of adjusted over the last, 5-6 years to containerization. Then the question is, all right, now I've got to get these containers moved around from environment to environment. How am I going to do that, right? There are plenty of
you're gonna run it on Joyent, right? You're gonna use Solaris zones.
You can actually run Docker containers on Joyent. That was the thing that they did,
which is pretty dope. Yeah,
that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is, but also it's like that guy who takes a Tesla and puts like big tires on a lift kit and it's just like it's a 4-wheel, off-roader, and you're just like,
wasn't Tesla going to make a truck for that? I mean, that's taking it a little too far.
Yeah, it's like you could do that, but I once saw a guy who put dirt tires on a Panigale and was zooming around the woods on a Ducati Panigale, and it was really neat. But you then kind of look back and you're just like, why? Yeah, and maybe that's a good segue, right? There's a number of technologies out there that right now are kind of stuck in the drift. A number of other container orchestrators out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
You guys remember Mesosphere? Mesos, right?
Yeah.
Mesos was the thing, and it was brilliant. It was beautiful. It was great. HashiCorp had Nomad, right?
And
Nomad's,
they still do.
And well, all these things are still around, right? And so there is a question of like, well, why has Kubernetes become like the one true de facto way of doing this, and all these other solutions sort of lost out? I think it was just the fullness of the ecosystem that was built around Kubernetes, right? It wasn't just one sort of niche solution for a certain problem that grew. I mean, both Mesos and Nomad really suffered, I think, from the fact that they were great for running batch. Mm-hmm. But a lot of those were really invented back in a time, and back at Joyent, we saw this a lot. In fact, I knew the guys at Berkeley, at the Rad Labs, who actually built the first version of Mesos. Their real problem was, I have thousands of machines, and each of them is doing one thing full time. Mm-hmm. And what I really want to do is I want to take, at the time it was a lot of like Spark clusters and Hadoop, right? They're like, I want to reallocate all this infrastructure in the middle of the night. So it's running big batch jobs at night, and then it swings back over to doing like production infrastructure during the day. And I need to do these shifts and stuff. It did those things really, really well. And then we tried to make it do something else, and it just didn't, right? So there's always going to be a case for fitness of purpose, right? What was it built to do? And that kind of goes to Joyent in that, right? Like what it was built for was fantastic. You can bolt things on to keep it alive, but mm-hmm. it's not really right. Like at some point, just let the patient die. I hate to say that. I love Joyent. But there's plenty of tech companies that are out there that are still sort of hanging on. In some cases, they haven't like fessed up to the change, right? Like if you want to see what's cool at Joyent, don't think of them as a cloud provider that competes against Amazon or Google or anything. Like look at Manta. What they built with their storage solution, Manta, was unbelievably awesome.
Well, didn't that use ZFS underneath?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I think ZFS is probably a pretty interesting storage technology. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, it was really cool, and I don't think that this has really kind of come back up of its time yet. Was Manta actually went even further than just like a really great complex storage solution like we got in ZFS, where before we had volume managers and we had file systems, and they were separate things that you used on top of each other, and then you had other tools that were doing for like snapshots and things like that. It was all awful. ZFS just brought that all into one solution, right, which was fantastic. Manta went like a step further, and they actually built essentially an S3 competitor is what we were kind of looking for, an answer to object store. But then with the proliferation of Hadoop and whatnot, we realized the problem with a lot of the object store is you were taking your data, putting it in this big repository, and then anytime you needed to operate on it, you had to pull it out, operate on it, and then either throw it away or put it back, right? And there was this big, huge round trip going between compute and storage. And Mark Cabbage, who was over at Joyent, had this idea of like, what if we could actually just take the compute and attach it to the storage in place, operate on it, and then go away, right? And instead of moving the bits, the hard bit, leave it and just operate on it. And that simple idea turned into something really quite extraordinary and beautiful.
Yeah, it did. So back about back on the topic of containerization and running things on things like Kubernetes or Mesos or Nomad or anything else. Like, what is the reason why containerization is the way we deploy? Why is that the default? And what makes those containers better than system packages? Like, why don't I just make an RPM?
Repeatability, right? Every time. A problem that we haven't had in a long time was people having personal service just for development purposes, or going and standing up VMs, local VMs, right, and then throwing them away, which was a pain. Being able to have a repeatable environment every single time without ever having to deal with that. Oops, I forgot to clean that up. Oops, I forgot to clean that up.
Unless you get your Docker Compose environment got a little messed up.
Yeah, it was always the thing that was so fascinating for me, is that like you would have a container on your local laptop that you were doing whatever testing with, and you can just it's the classic, like you can literally pick your laptop and put it into production, right? Like it's just, you don't even have to worry about the consistency between those two.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. One of the things that was a real reflection on for me when Docker came about as a business, because Joint, we started out in 2004 2005 on Solaris Zones. Like we were containerized. We were containerized cloud before there was even cloud. And when Docker came around, things sort of shifted a little bit, and the giant sea change was, at the time that we started out Joint, it was all about creating a lightweight operating system and lightweight VM. Right, the VM's too big. There's this emulation that at the time wasn't particularly great. It was low performance, and we're emulating all this stuff. Why are we emulating it? So I want something that looks like a server, smells like a server, tastes like a server, but is actually considerably smaller. And that went together with a couple other technologies inside of Sun around like hardware partitioning. Like on Sparks, you actually could say that core and those DIMMs actually are part of this logical system, and that core and those DIMMs, right? Like we could do all kinds of slicing and dicing, and this was just yet another layer of that. But when Docker came along and was like, actually stop thinking of that container as a small operating system and server, and instead of emulating the entire environment, just put exactly what you need into it, and then just run that, right? It just put in around it just precisely what it needs and nothing more. That was like, oh man, why didn't we think of that? Like, why didn't we think of that? Right? These paradigm shifts are interesting. And I think we're seeing that in Kubernetes too, right? It's the things that the points in time in technology that are really interesting generally aren't about the technology itself. It's a certain paradigm shift of how we approach that technology that's radically different. And it's hard actually to go back in time and remember like a time before we thought that way, because like you so change your thinking. Kubernetes, when it first came out, I remember it was just like incredibly complicated. Its history was kind of like wishy-washy, right? Because it was like the story back in 2015 was a couple of guys who'd created Borg at Google were going to do like the next generation system, but they weren't quite sure exactly what it was going to look like. So they were thinking about doing this like weird prototype thingy. And then that prototype, they would just sort of make open source. So they could get some like feedback on, and they were really iterating towards the successor for Borg. And then that project sort of took a life of its own. I'll admit, like I kind of ignored Kubernetes for like the first 2 years, because I was like, yeah, it's this like little sort of science project that like Google's doing, and it's cool, but like I'm not going to move anything over to it because I can't depend on it.
Well, I mean, and you're not Google. Like you don't have Google's problems. Only Google has Google's problems. Right.
And also at the time too, there was Mesos was actually used, I think, significantly more in real production scenarios, out there, that if you were even at that time betting between the two, I think most people were like, oh, well, we're going to go with this thing. It's way more stable with Mesos.
Oh, well, we already just deployed OpenStack everywhere, right? Like that was already the thing. So we don't need Kubernetes for any of this. We've got OpenStack if we want to run our own internal infrastructure cloud thing.
Yeah, and I mean, you still had like VMware was on the run. You had OpenStack, you had OpenShift, you had Rancher was really, really successful early on. And actually, there were a whole bunch of others. I can't even remember the name of them, but I remember going to like DevOps days back then, and you had like a whole side of like the hall that was all just container orchestration solutions, right?
Yeah.
Everything from sort of complex to do production stuff to like really easy. So get in your lab to kind of help people make that transition into containers in the first place.
Yeah.
And a lot of those have all been sort of absorbed or died away.
Yeah. So when we're considering, moving workloads into Kubernetes, like, is there a maintenance threshold or application size or complexity limit that where Kubernetes makes more sense than, some other thing, or is it just that's the default? We should just always do it there.
I think at this point, if you're deploying in the cloud, I think that there's a strong pull to just go that way from the beginning. Right now, I think, like, just thinking about Google, like Mondoo, we use Google, so I'm using Google a lot. But Cloud Run is fantastic, right? And it's unbelievably fast. So if you've got a container and you want to run it, why should I worry about orchestration at all? Like, I'll just chuck it into Cloud Run and it'll just run at a low cost. Or
is that like a serverless thing, or is it?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Like probably Fargate would be like the Amazon. Like, here's a container, just run it and charge me for whatever. I don't care.
Exactly. It's sort of what we wanted Lambda to be, but bigger, right? Like, you send a request, it triggers it, it wakes up, it answers the request, and it shuts back down. And you can run on crons, you can run on schedules for batch jobs and things like that. I was thinking about using one of these for just a really simple, like, 302 redirect sort of service. But I was like, for that, it's got to be really, really snappy. Firing up a container just to, wake up a Go program and then answer it. Like, I don't think it's going to be fast enough, and you would never know. It's incredible.
Well, I remember we ran an Nginx app just with redirects at Chef to preserve compatibility of all the old, 13 years worth of links to different tickets and that sort of thing.
Where do you think some like a tool like that breaks down? Like, obviously at some point it's great until it's not, and then maybe that's where like the Kubernetes makes more sense. But I'm kind of curious where that shift is, because it's like Fargate, I feel like, and Cloud Run solved the problem, which is like, I've got a container and I want to run it, and I don't care about anything else. Just run this or n number of this containers. But I guess where do you think that shift is, where it's like, no, it's time to like do a Kubernetes, like to actually have this infrastructure that we run for our containers?
I think he said it. I think it's when you just want to run just this one thing, particularly if that thing only depends on like services provided by the cloud provider. I think that those things work really well. I think when you start to have complex relationships between different components in like a serverless architecture, all of a sudden, I think that might be where that starts breaking down. I mean, I'm sure that you could do that where each of them runs as their own, Fargate service or Cloud Run service. But I think at some point, being able to keep cognitively the understanding of the interconnections between all those things breaks down. And that's what Kubernetes, I think, does really, really well. It exposes the relationship between each of these components, I think, in a really sane way and in a declarative way. One of the things that I think was commonly a problem for people with containers, just standalone containers, was networking, right? Trying to understand like how was the networking working, or whether they're like, I don't know, expose port 80 and it's done. Whereas in Kubernetes, we explicitly separate, right? You create a deployment and then you create a service, right? And so you're thinking about these two things. What is the thing and how do you get to the thing? I like the fact that it makes you think about that separately. And there's almost every developer now has a real, moment where I think, am I going to use an ingress? Am I going to use a node port? Am I going to use a load balance service? Right. And I think it's good that it makes you think about those sorts of things and the relationships between them. And then it goes up even further for a stack when you start talking about service mesh. And I think a lot of those things are still fairly early. I don't know too many people who are bold enough to go and run those. They're not complicated at all. Like, there's a sense that they're really hard. They're not. They actually make life really, really easy. But it does mean that there's an incredible amount of sort of complexity under the water that I think makes people afraid. And I think that's been the biggest barrier we've had to Kubernetes, is just some of the stuff is just really weird. It's not hard, but it's weird and different. And the other is that there's a sort of latent fear about the amount of complexity. And as we've had it around longer and longer, we're getting more and more comfortable with this. And we're not thinking about, do I need to know Kubernetes well enough to handle it when it breaks? I actually can kind of take that for granted, especially if I'm using, EKS or AKS or, any of these commercial Kubernetes deployments. They manage all that stuff. I don't know anything about the hosts. I just get what I need. It's declarative. And if it ever breaks, I just redeploy it. The peace of mind that comes out of being able to just redeploy your app at any point in time is pretty profoundly awesome. I think what wins a lot of us over.
What's the state of databases on Kubernetes? I always feel like in the early days, it was like, yeah, I'd run my stateless apps all day on Kubernetes, and that's fine. They die, they get relaunched or whatever. But has things matured enough where like people are legit running their distributed databases, their Elastic searches, Postgres, SQL, et cetera?
Yeah, there people are. I think you just got to be aware of the constraints there, and be careful about your approach. But certainly there are people who are doing it. Right, you can pin your workloads to certain nodes as necessary. And fundamentally, it's not terribly different than running a big database on any other server, right, under cluster management or whatnot. It's just a new way of going about it. So I'm not concerned about that, so long as you're aware of the fact that you put it into a system that's really good at moving things, and this thing can't move. But I think that those cases have become less of an issue as people have just migrated to cloud databases. And honestly, I think that the biggest reason people made a big switch over to cloud, especially coming from Joint, was the database, right? It was load balancers, but then databases. That's what kind of caught us off guard at Joint, is we had the best virtualization solution around. Like, we had the most beautiful kernel, like everything was exquisite that we had done. But when all of a sudden Amazon came along and they're like, you don't have to run MySQL anymore, we'll just give
that
it
was
to you.
so fabulous.
People were just like, hallelujah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I never have to think about a replication set or any of that. Yeah. Oh yeah. Sign me up. Take my money.
And I find it actually remarkable. I didn't ever think that Postgres would become as popular as it did. It's a great database, but when it came to like replication, snapshots, a lot of those basic functionalities, it was awful. It still is, frankly.
It was it was such a chore to do any of that, and it was like this huge level of orchestration and heavy lifting you had to do as a systems administrator.
And it couldn't even do it itself. If you remember,
Right.
like back in the day, you had
to
Splony and all these like sort of like other apps to kind of do it, or you'd use these terrible storage tricks, which were doable at one point when we had SANs.
Oh gosh.
All of a sudden we didn't have storage like that anymore available, right? And suddenly it became hard. So yeah, and seeing some of the really big databases come out, like BigQuery out of Google and all that, right? Just things that you just never would build on your own, because you just couldn't afford to do it, right? And the amount of time and effort and multi-year project to build this thing and manage it, and now like you can just use a tiny little sliver of it for your little teeny app and get that advantage.
I feel like the stigma of, like the rise of hosted Mongo with Atlas, right? Like the stigma of like, well, why would I put my database over there if all my stuff's over here? It's like, no, like the databases are just everywhere, and that's okay, because like they're the experts at these databases. You're not, right? They're better at operating them than you are. So, as long as they can obviously like maintain reliability and all those other aspects, again, like why would you ever want to do that yourself? Unless you're a database company. Like, why are you running a database?
Yep.
Right. And I mean, a lot of it came down to trust, right? Like Mongo is a great example where it's like, okay, I've given up, and I trust Amazon. I'll let Amazon do this. But then now you want to do it. I don't know if I can trust you, right? What are you going to do with my data?
Yeah.
And the other was particularly for enterprise applications, as people moved out of physical locations on secure private networks, and suddenly we're on the other side of the internet anyway, right? That was a big argument for a long time, was like, well, my database is over here, but my application's over there. So like, this is just obviously not a good idea. Well, they're both on the internet, and your users also on the internet, right? So it's not as big a thing as it used to be. So there's been some like things in the world that have had to sort of catch up as we, again, it's that paradigm shift, right? Just adjusting to a whole brave new world.
When it comes to the networks, though, I feel like some of the things that made it a lot easier is when Amazon had, its kind of like VPC secure networking to other vendors' VPCs. I feel like Packet as well also had some of that ability where it's like could make those interconnections in a secure way between vendor and consumer of that data, right? So maybe it was just like the rise of some of that abstractions around the networking that, like, I don't know anything about networking other than like some IPv4 subnetting that's like burned into my memory. But like if some vendors like, yeah, like you can connect directly without egressing to the internet, securely, then it's like, cool, auditor people said that's great, I'm going to use that.
Yeah, well, and let's be clear. I mean, when we talk about a lot of these technology decisions, we're sort of talking about like the major corpus of like companies, developers, users out there, right? There are definitely other niche parts of the universe that are entirely different. When I was so Equinix was acquired Packet. Equinix is, some people know who they are, some people don't. They're like the Four Seasons of data centers. Is like, these are the primo data centers you want to be in. So I was super glad to be acquired by them. They were fantastic. That's where Amazon started. It's like anybody who's anybody is an Equinix facility. But their real bread and butter, actually, Equinix, when I got acquired, is they don't think of themselves as a data center company at all. They never talk about buildings and all this. What they talk about is interconnection. That's their whole thing. In fact, Equinix is actually a concatenation of equal internet exchange. They was started as a company that wanted to create a place for different providers to be able to come together and not be under the control of Ma Bell, AT&T, Sprint, Verizon, and all those big players, right? Here's a place where we can all come together. And that's what they do really well. And that's why if you want to be in any facility, you want to be in an Equinix facility, not because it's a better building. It is a better building, but because that's where all the connections are. If you go to like the West End in Seattle, that's where like all the telecommunications in the entire city comes into. It's this one building. All of it goes into Equinix switches before it leaves the Seattle region. Anyway, I mean, they can do some amazing things, like you're saying. Like, with Amazon, you can actually get interconnections into Equinix's fabric, and you can get private connections. This is something I looked at pretty seriously doing at Chef, because there were some customers or just didn't accept the fact that they were going to use a Chef server on the other side of the internet. This did not jive with them.
Yeah.
But talking to Equinix, it's like, well, I actually could get put into their fabric, right? And then I could actually set up a separate set of servers. And then if you were that kind of company, you could actually just have a tap put into an Equinix fabric and connect it to me, and I could give you private service. And the major telcos now are doing this too. They'll do it with dark fiber and all kinds of stuff. And you're just like, wow, I didn't know I could do all that stuff. And like, you can. And then there's a whole different side of the world of, government, right? That has certain requirements. And then there's the whole top secret world. One of the places I thought about going before coming to Mondoo was going to Amazon. And I didn't realize it, but I knew about GovCloud. I'd worked with GovCloud, but they have a whole top secret cleared AWS deployment. Which is crazy. Like, you have to have clearance to even talk about what's in there. And it's crazy. But like, there's that whole world, right? The whole DoD world where, nothing's ever going to touch the internet ever. And like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah. But I mean, those get hacked on TV shows all the time by the other government agencies.
Right.
So speaking of things that are enormous and large in scale, the Kubernetes ecosystem itself is pretty big. Like, how does anybody keep up with the things they need to run their workloads on a Kubernetes cluster? Like, you got Helm and Prometheus and like all these other projects. How do you keep track of all the other ones that are coming out every other week?
Hacker News.
But how do you keep up with Hacker News? Like,
actually, no,
stream, right?
It's funny. I was thinking about it. You guys don't call yourself system administrators? Do you know anyone who calls themselves an system administrator? Well, yeah, I mean, but you know what I mean? Like, the idea of like the system administrator, or at least that title's gone away. And we like to believe that it's all moved into DevOps or SREs or whatever, right? But like, at the end of the day, what at the beginning, like, what was a sysadmin? Like, how did most of us end up like becoming like administrators? Like, in the beginning, we were like kids in high school, and we spent all our time playing with this thing, and we knew more about it than anyone else. We were the subject matter expert on, Windows 3.1 or, Sun OS or whatever it was, right? We were the people who knew, right? And then everyone knew that you were the person who knew, right? So they'd go to you because you knew about that thing. And it didn't matter what it was, but you were the techie person who knew that. And then by association, they would figure out anything else that you didn't know, right? We all had our jibes. And then, like, one day somebody's like, I will pay you to do that, and you will be called an administrator. And you're just like, all right, I like the
let's do this
part. That's awesome.
Yep.
And there was a lot of prestige that came from it, right? Everyone comes to you is like, hello, person who knows everything. I don't know anything. Like, it's like they'd put you up here and they'd go down here. I don't know how that happened, but I liked it because I was at the top. So that was cool.
Mm-hmm.
But as we've gone on this sort of journey over time, right, like that dynamic still exists. There are people who know more than other people. And the technology, though, keeps shifting. And we see these sort of blocks in time of things that have changed, right? 12 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, like if you were the person who knew Puppet, Chef, Ansible, whatever, you were the top dog, right? You were the one everyone was going to for how do we do this and how do we solve that problem? And then it shifted in like the last 3 years. And all of a sudden, if you're not the person who's up to date on everything that's going on in Kubernetes and how it all works and has done it all before, like you're kind of behind the block. And I got to admit, like I feel like I'm there. Like I've done quite a bit of Kubernetes stuff, but then that one person walks in who's like, well, why aren't you using blah 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 blah? And you're like, I don't know.
I don't know why I'm not using it because I don't have 5 years of experience in that because it came out last week.
So a lot of us actually have, I think, I've given into the reality that for a while, I thought I could do Kubernetes on my own and I could work with other administrators. And we went through a whole exercise at Packet with my team where I'm like, we're not going to go and hire a bunch of like Kubernetes weirdos. Like, we're just going to figure it out. It's the future. We're all going to have to do this anyway. We all want this on our resumes, like not just for what we're doing at Packet, right? But thinking about like the long-term future. This is the future. Let's all learn it. And we went through an exercise of all trying to learn Kubernetes. And frankly, we were stumbling around in the dark. Because you just sort of go out and grab everything that you hear about that's new and shiny, and you try and figure out and put it together, and you just build this horrible Frankenstein. It wasn't until we sort of like fessed up to the reality that like we weren't going to get there at the rate that we were going, and we were so distracted by so many other signals out there and other paths that we hired somebody in who, even with Kubernetes, there are people who got on board really early and they've got 3 years of like actual experience of like building, failing, trying again, building, failing, trying again, and they've got that experience built up that they can come in and move things forward. Right. And we did that. And we brought in an individual who was incredible. And literally within a week, he had gotten us further than we'd have been able to get in a year. A lot of us, it's all declarative, right? He kind of came with his bag of tools, and that's a big thing too, right? Like whenever you're a consultant or whatnot, you're not looking at them to sit there and like think about your problem afresh. You're like, I hope you've solved this a couple of times and you've already got all that stuff built out, and you just got to tweak it a little bit and you can get me there right now. So that's still going to be a way to go for I think for a little while. I think we're probably 2 or 3 years away from, a point where, the majority of people have a sufficient amount of skill. And that also means that we're waiting for the Kubernetes ecosystem to cool down, right? There's still an explosion of solutions, and then they're going to come back down. And we've seen some of that happen already, but not widely enough. In any of these areas, there's just too many solutions. It'll condense down soon.
What's the shift you think between just use EKS or GKE, basically use a hosted Kubernetes service versus run your own? Obviously, like if I'm in a data center, I'm running my own, or I'm buying OpenShift or something like that. But if you're in the cloud vendor, like, does it actually make sense to run your own Kubernetes like on EC2 in the cloud, or just like GKE, EKS, basically use their primitives instead?
Yeah, if you don't have the expertise in house, you need to go with somebody else's managed solution straight up, no matter what your deployment strategy is. Managing Kubernetes on bare metal servers is a whole different level of challenging, right?
Yep. Or running it on a cloud provider's, virtual instances of whatever, like EC2 instances or something else. Like it can be a mess.
It can be difficult too. It gets a little bit easier though, at least in that, like, if you mess up, you just delete the thing, right? Yeah. And like spawn up a new one, right? Whereas if you're in a facility, you got to remember, like, if you're in a data center, you're looking around at what you've got available in those racks, and if you don't have it, you're going to go buy it. And if you spec that thing wrong, right, and you didn't get enough memory, or you put an obscene amount of CPU in it or whatnot, and then you realize, oh shit, my failure to manage just got crazy. Like, I didn't need 3 big servers. I actually needed 12 small servers, right? Or the storage provider now has changed, and now I just don't have enough disks in the things, right? Like, that's a like, gulp, go drink a beer. What am I going to do when I have to go tell the team tomorrow that I spec the wrong machines, right?
Right.
Like, those are hard decisions, right?
Yeah. So with Kubernetes, you mentioned you build the wrong thing, or you don't know what you're doing really. So you try like 6 different operators for doing all these different things you want to do in Kubernetes. And then you've built what you called Frankenstein's monster out of your cluster. Does Kubernetes lead and lend itself to an easier mess of bit rot and technical debt that you have to sort through?
I think some of that is yet to play out. I do think that we are going to end up with some really disgusting clusters over time.
A cluster something?
Yeah. I mean, there are, right. There are a lot of things that get hidden away, right? And yeah, taking whatever new operator is out there and injecting it into the cluster when it's just kube apply YAML from somewhere. It's easy for a bunch of those to get in there and completely forget about them and create something that's gross, where somebody who suddenly knows what they're doing kind of like starts poking around in there like, what the heck is all this stuff? Like, I don't know. I didn't even know it was in there. Service accounts. I mean, like that's one of the problems we have in Kubernetes, right? Is security, right? There's all kinds of like service accounts. People are like, I don't know, so long as my app runs, right? And we have the equivalent of like, just run everything as root, right? Because on one hand, it's wrong. On the other hand, you just need it to work, right? And nobody who goes and does something dumb with regards to security ever means to like be insecure. They need to get it up, and they're going to do what they need to do because, in terms of priority, running is more important. So there's a lot of Frankenstein out there, but the beauty, and I'm hoping what covers our asses here, is the fact that our deployments are declarative, right? You theoretically can take your Kubernetes cluster, throw it away, create a new one, and be back up and running. And so that's the real challenge: is are you going all the way through? And this is the same with any technology. You're like, are you fully utilizing it? We saw with config management. There were people who would do certain things by hand and then certain things by config management. And then 6 months later, somebody goes to deploys a server and you're like, why doesn't it work? I applied Chef and it didn't work, right? Like you gotta see that all the way through. The same is true with Kubernetes. And some of those things are difficult to do, right? Like you get it up and running, but it's still got a lot of hand holding, especially if you're dealing with old storage that you had to move into place. Right, where you needed to put all that storage there, right? Well, you probably knew that you probably should have built an initiator, initializing container that went and set up all the storage and all that, but maybe you didn't do that. So yeah, we're going to see a lot of people get bit.
So you mentioned security, and don't run everything as the root or the primary service account or whatever. How do you make sure that your Kubernetes is secure? How does one scan your cluster for vulnerabilities? Like, is there any cool tools out there? Or any
there's this company called Mondoo who makes this tool. It's really fantastic.
Leading question.
Yeah,
love a good softball,
right?
The security space is interesting right now. Like it is exploding. It's incredible the number of players that are out there. I knew that there were a lot out there, and then when I did my due diligence, about the space before I came onto Mondoo, and then after I came on board, all of a sudden I was interested in a whole new way. Right? What are the other markets out there? And man, it's convoluted and confusing, and there's a lot of it, and there's a lot of money at it. I mean, companies like Snyk, do you know how much funding Snyk has taken?
I haven't looked.
They've got to be close to $1 billion.
Yeah. $1 billion.
Money.
Bathtub
if you
billion?
actually look at, so I've actually many friends it's I always call it Sneak. For a while they were like, you could pronounce it either way. And then I actually found on their site that they now go by Sneak. Like, which it's weird. I don't know why they just picked one versus the other, but yeah, I had some friends that went there, and because obviously my time at ThreatStack, they have Sneak has an office in Boston. So as some people started moving on from there, they went there. But just watching the number of people going on board, and then just the number of people that are using the tool. It's such a great story because I love it. I love it because it just speaks to the developer mindset, which is that developers, to your point, like if you're trying to deploy an app and you're like, yeah, there's the EC2, they're like, why am I working here? And they're like kind of being told like, hey, like your code is insecure, like go figure out, like go make it more secure. And they're like, I don't want to do that. Like, can I just scan it or something like that? And it's solving that problem where it's like developers are like, I just want to get back to writing code, right? Just scan my thing. Am I good? Great. Moving on. Yeah, the space is totally wild to see.
Yeah, Snyk. I like Snyk better. I think that actually kind of fits better in a security context.
Yeah, it's very sneaky.
Sneaky, right? Yeah,
yeah,
that makes more sense than Snick. Like Snicker.
It's so now you know is what it stands for.
So now you. Oh wow!
Wow. Yeah, I clearly had not spent enough time on their website.
So now you know.
This is only because of like the 20 or 30 friends of mine and former coworkers who all work there now.
I was always wondering about that. So they're going the right direction, and they're a direction that we're going as well. And I think we're going to see this as differentiation. The reason I was excited to join, Mondoo, I mean, obviously I'm big fans of Dom and Chris, and Sue is one of the most amazing businesswomen ever. So I was glad to work with her, but that's not quite enough, right? Like we want this to be a successful business. I've been in operations for a long time, and I end up doing a lot of security stuff, and I don't bill myself as a security person, because that puts you in a certain category that I really don't want to be overly associated with.
And not because it's bad, but it's just it is bad. It's a different kind of domain.
There's I mean, this is what gets to it is here's what happens in most organizations. You have a security team, right? And it's exactly the same problem we had with QA teams once upon a time.
Oh yeah.
And that security team has nothing to do with the product, the daily development, the daily operation, the daily production, right? They're just off there in space. And they want to they have big budgets, they spend a bunch of money, and they sort of look at everything, and then they come down with these nasty lists of how everyone is stupid and doing it wrong, right? You're just like, oh, I'm so sorry. And then you stop everything and try and fix it for a while, right? And you do the best you can. And at some point they're just like, well, you didn't do good enough, but it's as good as we could do. We know you're dumb anyway. It's just a super adversarial relationship that happens between security teams and DevOps teams, SREs, developers, right? And it's super far removed, right? Like by the time somebody creates that vulnerability, they write into code or they deploy that infrastructure, whatever, they write that Terraform, then they're done. They go on with their day. 3 months later, somebody's just like, you did a dumb thing long time ago. It's awful. And it's hard cognitively. And we found that the big thing through DevOps, right, was cycle time, reduced cycle time. That was one of the big breakthroughs, was reduce the cycle time. We saw this with incident response, right? How are you going to get the best possible incident response? Get the person who actually wrote the thing, right? Or at least get somebody close to them who actually knows something about it, instead of this poor sysadmin who knows nothing about it. Is just like, oh, well, reboot it and see if it makes it better, because I don't know, right? We got to get closer to like the genesis. So yeah, Snyk is perfect. Moving away from what we had before, like the best thing we had before was like static analysis tools that you would run like in your CI pipeline. And a lot of them, they didn't have support for modern languages. So they didn't work in a lot of modern shops. They didn't support Go. They, unless you were a Java shop, a lot of that stuff didn't work well. Being able to have things now like Dependabot in GitHub, having Snyk now integrated into, like, it will tell you that you did a bad thing before you can commit it, right? And you're just like, I'm all too happy to fix that thing. I don't want to write insecure code. Thank you. I will now fix it. That's the same approach we're taking with our scanning, right? Is we want scanners that are not owned by the security team. We want security scanners for everyone, right? That you can put into your CI pipeline, that you can have on your desktop, that you can run, deploy your app on a local Kubernetes cluster in Kind or something like that, and then run Mondoo against it and like look for any, security issues in it or policy issues. And no, right now, rather than waiting until later, and have that sort of peace of mind. And so I think you're going to see security companies sort of really shake out over the next, couple of years, as we really start to segregate between those that are developer-focused security companies and those that remain, big IT, big security team sort of solutions. And, there'll be an interesting war, right? In terms of like price point and stuff, right? Like, one of the reasons I did like doing security and audit stuff in the past is I couldn't get budget running IT or operations, right? Why do you need that? Why do you need that? But as soon as I put security on, I said, I need it for compliance. They were just like, how much do you want?
Yep. How much do we need to spend to be compliant with whatever? Yep.
They're like, I don't know. Are you the compliance guy? I am now.
I am now. Yeah. I put my compliance hat on, you see.
Exactly. I got chef into a lot of places that way, right? There was a lot of places that would not pay for chef, wouldn't get into contracts, wouldn't spend money on it. But when you're like, everything will be more secure because you actually can control your configuration, they're just like, I'm listening now.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's true. Cool. Well, we are headed towards the end of our hour here. I'd like to take some time and do some wrap up. We have an important question from one of our viewers for you, Ben.
What kind of scotch do I have on my shelf today?
I'm gonna make a guess and just say all of it.
Well, okay. So to be clear, all the stuff that's up there on top of my shelves, those are all empty bottles. So there's probably one of everything up there. But in the active shelf,
the active
shelf.
That's the back. Yeah. So you got some Macallan. Yep, that's
no, I don't.
Oh no,
no. Ben sounded.
Wow. No, that was. Geez,
watch your filthy mouth.
That was like there was offensive there. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there's not many. I would not make that mistake. But not Macallan. I don't like. Anok 12 is one of my summer malts. This so fantastic. Taste of lemon. It's sort of sweet. Really fantastic. You want to give it a generous amount of water to go with this one to really get it to its fullest. But I love this one. So this will be getting consumed quickly before it gets any colder. But as it's getting cold in the Northwest, it's Bunnahabhain time.
Mm-hmm.
So the actual bottle isn't here. It's actually on my fireplace in the house
because you got to unwind by the fire as the weather turns cool and kick those feet up and toast them while you toast the day.
Oh yeah. Pipe in a good dram.
Yeah.
But I'll make one recommendation since I have all kinds of fun stuff. This one here,
the Glenlivet
rum
barrel,
massively underrated. And Glenlivet, the primary flavor you get out of Glenlivet 12 is actually pineapple. In fact, when I do master classes, I actually use Glenlivet because it's readily available, and you sort of put your nose in it until you smell pineapple. Until you do, and at some point they get it, and there's like, and all of a sudden it's like that's the method, right? But they decided to create this one, tropical, the Caribbean Reserve.
So it's just pineapple all the time.
Yeah, and I was just like, pineapple rum, yeah, that's got to work. The funny thing though is they made it super cheap. When it first came out, I think this was like $23 a bottle.
Oh my gosh.
They were putting like cocktail recipes with it because they thought it was just going to be a terrible mixer. It was like a bottom barrel. Holy crap, it's great. I mean, look, it's not Octomore, it's not Bruichladdich, right? But like this is a solid like daily drinker that's just really delightful. So yeah, I knew the price was going to go up, so I grabbed a couple. And now I think it's like $45, almost $50 a bottle, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to watch. I don't know if it's just demand or supply chain, or probably demand, right? But
probably supply chain, really.
Yeah, it is.
Everything's supply chain these days.
Trump's messing with our import-export.
Yeah, and I mean that was the whole thing with the wine. What was it? The wine duties were going to increase dramatically. I guess that got returned back around, but yeah, I mean, just trying to find different scotches and whiskeys and stuff. I've actually had more bourbon just because it's a lot easier to get a handle on because it's all within the US, right? And there's some local places too that have been great. They get they just buy the whole barrel. So they'll do a bunch of tastings, they buy the whole barrel, they do their own bottling. That's been a lot of fun too, because it's like, it's a wildly different flavor. It's like, oh yeah, I mean, they're all from like the one warehouse in Indiana or whatever, but it's like, yeah, this one's on like the 4th floor in the back, and this one's on the 1st floor. It's the same juice inside, but like wildly different flavor. Crazy.
Yeah, single barrel casks are awesome when you can get a hold of them. I mean, they're expensive to buy on their own, so if you can get somebody who will give you a bottle out of one, it's definitely the way to go.
Very cool. Yeah, we picked up the Glenfiddich Fire and Cane recently.
Any good?
It's really tasty. Like I don't have the discerning palate to pick up, pineapple or chicory root or the sweetness of summer off of my dram. But I do know when I like something, and I do like that one.
Since we're going fruity, I'll go another one. So this one came out from
Cake?
Glenmorangie, limited release. Tastes of Cake, a tale
What?
of cake.
Oh my goodness, that
Yeah,
is.
and I mean, just seeing this on the shelf, I was
Yeah,
just
you
like,
have to buy that. Like
it's
I
pretty and shiny. Like I'm all about this. You know, I'm secure in
yeah.
my
And it says
masculinity.
cake.
Like I just need this.
Yeah.
This is wonderful.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
I always
amazing
think,
art.
yeah, it's great art. Glenmorangie is always delicious. Like they
Mhm.
just never go wrong. But yeah, it was finished in a name of a cask that comes from like Turkey that I can't even pronounce the name of.
Mhm.
But it's a dessert wine cask finish. And
Interesting.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't know that it
Okay.
really tasted of cake, but it was darn delicious. You see, I got like this little bit, and I just don't want to
Yeah.
drink it.
Right.
Like,
You just
I'm
got to
just trying.
savor it. Hold
It's
on to
gonna
that for a while.
it's gonna oxidize into nothing, so I should finish it. But yeah, that was a fun one. So every so often these unique bottlings come out, but
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, not a unique bottling, but a name of Glen that there is amusing. My wife has a friend who went to Scotland years ago, and goes into the bar of the hotel they were in, and this is like a hotel bar, and says, "Yeah, I just like to start with everything that starts with Glen." And the bartender's like, "Oh, oh, you sweet summer child." And
yeah,
so it's just they pull down like 15 or 20 bottles, and they're like, "Are you sure you want to start with everyone
just
that
keep
starts with
going.
Glen? Because I don't think good thing you're staying in this hotel."
You gotta have staples, right?
Oh
Lafroy King,
yeah, yeah,
always.
Lefroy. Yeah, that's
I
one of my
always keep a
favorites.
bottle of the Octomore, Brooklotti, and Port Charlotte on hand. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
also, it's getting colder.
Oh
Glenfarclas,
yeah.
family owned, delicious, pretty affordable. Like definitely, winter malt that I really love.
Hmm.
And a funny story. Tamara and I created a tradition when we leave Seattle and go home. We live on Bainbridge, so we have to get on the ferry. We started going down to the Zig Zag Cafe. Zig Zag Cafe is a world famous bar in Seattle that we didn't even know existed prior to the pandemic. But when we started making cocktails, we learned all about them. And Last Word is one of my wife's favorite cocktails. So I started going there. One night I pull up at the bar, and there's two guys next to me, both young, that are drinking single malt. I kind of start talking to him, and then I'm talking to the bartender, and then he tells me, "Hey, we got this like charity thing going. We've got Glenfarclas 25, and it's only, I think it was like $10 a dram." I was
Oh my
just like,
God.
"What?" Yeah. He's like, "Oh yeah. No, it's a pretty good price, right? That's a pretty good price." I'm like normally that'd be like $60 a dram, and it's 10. I'm like, basically like everyone at the bar is getting one. Like just hand one out to everyone at the bar. So I figured, if I just bought one for myself, I just, so it's like I think 10 of us at the bar or something like that. So just handed it all out. Boy, that bar got real fun that night. Like everybody was like, yeah,
Excellent.
It's
that
fun
was
to
cool.
share. It's fun to share a special one like that.
It is.
Absolutely.
It truly is.
It was, and you don't get to do that very often in bars these days. Where you
Well,
kind of
yeah,
like,
these days you're lucky to find another person in the bar lately, right? Because they're, nobody's going out, no one's enjoying their time with their 10 closest strangers.
well, Zig Zag, you have to show your vaccination card when you walk in.
Oh, I've not encountered that myself. Like there are places that say, you have to be vaccinated, or if you're not vaccinated, you have to wear a mask, and like there's nobody's checking anything like that.
No,
But
Zig
I'm also
Zag
in
really,
Colorado, so
they really wanted to be open, and they wanted to be clear about it. So I was
mhm.
irritated like the first time because like I didn't have my vaccination card on me, and I was like, I have a picture of it somewhere in my phone, like
Yep,
5,000 pictures back or whatnot. But
right.
the Walgreens app, if you got yours at Walgreens, you just
Oh,
and like it's got a nice proof in there. So,
oh, that's cool. I'll have to check that out because I did get my vaccine at a local Walgreens.
but it is I know lots of people have different feelings about showing. I certainly don't want to live in a country where you have to show your papers, but being in a place where everyone is vaxxed it's a little comforting. And
Yeah.
frankly, I want to support some of the businesses that are really important to me,
Hmm.
and they just want to be open. And so
Yep.
whether it doesn't matter what they think about it either, they want to serve patrons. I want to be served. Like
Yeah.
let's all just get
We're
this thing over
we're all
with.
in this together.
Let's do it.
Yep. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for joining us today. Thank you, all of you out there who are watching along the live stream on Twitch, or if you're catching it in the future, hello, future people, future travelers on
Send us stock
YouTube.
tips.
Yes, indeed. All right. Thank you, everyone. And
Thanks.
we are out.
Thanks so much.